Good evening and welcome to the September 14th public meeting of the USD 305 School Board. Please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. The first item we've got here is approval of our agenda, and we do have a personnel addendum that's been made available.
Mr. President, I move that we approve the agenda as revised.
Emma Doherty, second.
Thank you, Ann and Emma. We have a motion and a second. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. All right, the next item on our agenda is in regard to exceeding the revenue neutral tax rate hearing. At the last board meeting on August 10th, 2021, we held a budget work session to review the budget document, the mill levies, and the estimated published budget. Tonight, we have two final steps to wrap up the 2021-2022 formal budget process to meet the September 20th deadline. The first is the hearing to exceed the revenue neutral rate. The notice and details were published in the Saline Journal on August 19th. We will now open the hearing for the purpose of hearing and answering objections of taxpayers related to the exceeding the revenue neutral tax rate for the 2021-2022 school year. With no comments, I would accept a motion to approve the resolution as presented.
Mr. President, move we approve the resolution as presented.
Mr. Grant makes a motion. Any second?
Second.
And with a second, all in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. The next thing on our agenda is to approve the 2021-2022 budget. The last step in the year-long budgeting process, the overall mill levy is estimated to decrease by 0.959 mills. The notice and details were published in the Saline Journal on August 19th. We will now open the budget hearing for the purpose of hearing and answering objections of taxpayers related to the proposed use of funds and the amount of tax to be levied. Nothing there. I would accept a motion to approve the 2021-22 budget as published.
Mr. President, I move we approve the 2021-2022 budget as published.
Thank you, Mr. Grant.
Emma Doherty, second.
Emma, all in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. Next item on our agenda, recognitions and presentations. Jennifer Camion.
Recognize spring sports state qualifiers who were involved in regional and state playoff action beyond the end of last school year. Please keep in mind that some of our coaches and their teams will not be here due to fall sports and that some of the students graduated in May. We welcome tonight Carson Arnold of Central High School, who is our photography intern. Our first group of awards goes to 5A track and field state qualifiers at South High School. Justin Ebert is the coach. Will you please join Superintendent Exline in the front? And we have Jody Nutter standing in this evening. Thank you. Will all the track students please line up next to them as well? As I call your name, please step towards Superintendent Exline so you can receive your award. And at that time, parents, if you would like to take a picture, feel free to stand up and we'll be glad to pause for a photo. In the boys' division, there were 6 South High School qualifiers. 3 have graduated. Team members were Seth Robin, Jr., qualified in the 110 high hurdles and 300-meter hurdles. Kason Dietz, Sr., qualified in the shot put. Brandon Cox, Sr., qualified in the long jump. Team members who graduated were Clayton Bailey, Hugh Hill, Daryl Evans. In the girls' division, there were 6 South High School qualifiers. Team members were Honesty McNeil, sophomore, placed 3rd in the javelin and qualified in the shot put. Grace Allen, senior, and qualifying in the 4x800 meter relay, Kylie Arnold, Olivia Mancino Hind, Annalise Gogati, Angelica Alvarado. Would you please allow the Board of Education to congratulate you now? Our next group of awards goes to 5A track state qualifiers at Central High School. Rick O'Neill is the coach. Due to football practice today, Coach Rick O'Neill won't be able to be here, but Matt Dykus will represent the track team. Will you please join Superintendent Exline, and will all the track students please line up next to them? In the girls' division, there were 9 Central High qualifiers. Anna Hoagland, sophomore, placed 10th in the pole vault. Michaela Cunningham, junior, placed 12th in the high jump, 8th in the long jump, 12th in the 4x100 relay, and 13th in the 4x400 relay. Callan Hall, sophomore, placed 12th in the 4x100 relay and 13th in the 4x400 relay. Elle Denning, sophomore, placed 6th in the 400-meter dash, 12th in the 4x100 relay, and 13th in the 4x400 relay. Placing 12th in the 4x100 relay, Chalicia Samilton, senior, Caitlin Botts, senior. Placing 13th in the 4x400 relay, Kendall Gary, sophomore, Janae Montoya, sophomore. And team member who graduated was Reagan Geisler. In the boys' division, there were 6 Central High qualifiers. William Griffith, senior, placed 12th in the 800-meter run and 14th in the 4x800-meter relay. Placing 14th in the 4x800-meter relay, Zach Tibbetts, junior. Isaac French, senior. Cooper Affolder, sophomore. Abram Jennings, sophomore. And Alex Shea, senior, placed 16th in the high jump. Would you please allow the Board of Education to congratulate you now? Next, we recognize tennis state qualifiers at Central High School. Michael Gall is the coach, and Richard Strange is assistant coach. Will you please join Superintendent Exline in the front? And will all the tennis players please line up next to them? The following students were the 2021 5A state tennis champions. This was the 13th state title in school history. They were Connor Phelps, Jr., finished 7th in 5A state singles, was 5A regional champion, AVCTL league champion, and had a 32-7 record. Colin Phelps, Jr., finished 10th in 5A state singles, was 5A regional runner-up, AVCTL league runner-up, and had a 28-11 record. Graduates were Reed McHenry, Max Schaefer, McCabe Green, and Brady Stack. Would you please allow the Board of Education to congratulate you now? Or call someone else up. So someone else has come in, so we'll call them up. And we'd like to invite Brant Cox to the front, please. Very good. Let's see here. And Brant was a part of the winning South High School boys track team, and he's a senior who qualified in the long jump. Our next group of awards goes to a Gulf State qualifier, or qualifiers at Central High School. And both qualifiers graduated, so we invite Coach Fear, William, and Collister Ryan to the front, if they're here. And if they're not here, we wish them congratulations. Our last group of awards goes to swimmers at Central High School who qualified for the state competition. Salina Central Girls Swimming placed 12th out of the 47 teams that scored at the state championship meet in Topeka. They placed 5th in the 200 medley relay, 9th in the 200 freestyle relay, and 16th in the 400 freestyle relay. Don Sheffergen coaches the girls swimming and diving teams from South and Central High. Will you please join Superintendent Exline in the front? And will all the swimming students please line up with them? Salina Central team members, Zoe Burmaster, senior, 7th place, 100 backstroke. Asby Peckham, sophomore, 9th place, 100 butterfly. Team members who graduated were Kate Jennings, Olivia Moore, Chloe White, and we have swimmers at South High School who qualified for state competition. The South High girls swimming placed 22nd out of the 47 teams entered. Salina South team members, Cameron Kelsey, sophomore, Rachel Sims, senior, and Allie Exline. Do we have her? Oh, okay. Rachel Sims, senior, 11th place, 1 meter, 11 dives. And Allie Exline, sophomore, not attending volleyball game this evening. So please allow the Board of Education to congratulate you.
Thank you. It's nice to recognize the students again. That's a great part of what we get to do. Next item on our agenda is going to be with Mr. Brad Anderson for Salina Arts and Humanities.
Thank you, board members. I'm standing in on behalf of one of our staff members who typically makes this presentation and manages this program. She's taking care of a newborn baby at home that came during the River Festival. So we have an extra celebration and a future client for you all. I know I'm preaching to the choir, but if you can indulge me just a second to thank you, first of all, for your administrative and financial support of the Arts Infusion Program. It's been going on for about 4 decades in a partnership with USD 305, and this partnership is an instrumental part in the richness of what we can offer to supplement the curriculum of USD 305 and other venues in the community with rich and diverse arts offerings that are reflected in this infusion guide. Through your support of the River Festival by declaring a holiday and the support of the festival that we get in the community, that things like the infusion guide are helped to be underwritten by Consolidated Printing as part of their sponsorship. They make a contribution to help us do things like this and get these out in the community, not just in the teachers' hands and the administrators, but we also use this guide that you'll receive a copy of to distribute professionally, or to professional human relations and other resources around the community as a reflection of the rich cultural environment that we live and that we benefit from as a leader in the state in cultural arts and education. And so this hopefully will serve as a resource as you're recruiting elementary and secondary teachers and other paraprofessionals and others to want to be a part of the community, to be able to see the richness and diversity of not only the partnership that we have with USD 305, but what some of the private 501c3s are doing as a reflection in the community, I think is a very nice tool that helps distinguish Salina and shows the strength of the partnership that we have. So with that being said, the invitations to the teachers have been made. The response was robust. We are have plenty of requests for artists and performers and others to be in the schools throughout the year. We look forward to getting them engaged in just the next few weeks and throughout the rest of the academic year. And as a final note, and with 4 grandchildren in the school system, I want to thank you for your leadership last year, helping us adapt to difficult times in scheduling and in health and safety. The steps that you took, the safety measures that you put in place, the care and responsibility that you took is exceptional and has made a huge difference to us and our work and to me and my family. And I want to thank you for the leadership that you've provided. So with that, is it okay to distribute these? And or they have copies already? Well, then these are for your HR. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. We appreciate your partnership, too. Okay, the next item on our agenda is the consent agenda. The consent agenda consists of minutes from the August 10th, 2021 regular meeting, the personnel report, the amended personnel report, the financial reports, including the August bills list, the July treasurer's report, the July investment report, the July journal entries, to approve the encumbrance listing to Hubert Company LLC for the purchase of cafeteria trays in the amount of $29,914.75, to approve a gift request of hand sanitizer from Kansas State University at a value of $7,200, to approve the K-Jump member settlement agreement with Symmetry Energy Solutions LLC in the amount of $87,336.43 for the February gas bill refund, and to approve the Kasb Energy Management Program membership participation and agency agreement. Is there a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Mr. President, I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Dr. Bandre. And a second? Scott, we have a motion and a second.
I have a question.
Okay.
I don't remember seeing the addendum to the, is it somewhere I haven't looked? Oh, it's in the back. Okay, I'm going to assume that it's okay. So, thank
Okay.
you.
Yes. Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. Okay, the next item is public forum. We have a couple people who have expressed interest in presenting to us tonight. Ms. Carol Reed, if you would, go ahead and come up. And real quick, I'm going to read the opening statement that we always provide here. I know you have already read the guidelines for the public forum, but I would like to read them for the public. Public forum is a non-action item on the agenda. The board appreciates patrons taking time to share with us their thoughts and concerns. Public forum is a time for comment on non-agenda items. This is not an appropriate time or place for patrons to make comments of a personal nature about any district employee or student. Persons making comments which violate the privacy rights of district employees and students will be asked to stop speaking or cease their remarks. If the patron or parent has a concern with one or more employees, the board will refer that person to the appropriate supervisor or to the superintendent for further review. Please understand it is not the board's practice to respond during public forum comments or questions. Thank you. Ms. Reed?
Yeah, Carol Reed of here in Salina. Can you hear me okay? Can you guys hear me? Okay. I want to do something real quick here. I would like anybody in this room that has I'm not quite sure how I want to word this, but if you have a relationship or a family member or a person in your family that is of different culture or race than you, would you raise your hand, your right hand? Awesome. Okay. My concern, and I gave you my little note, I'm still hung up on this word equity and equality. I looked over the minutes on your equity council, of which I had several concerns, so I wanted to share those with you. It looks like this was established. If I'm wrong on some of these things, you can certainly correct me. Looks like it was established back in August, around 2019. And this discussion at that time was to broaden the word of the definition of equity so that it showed and covered all aspects of equity. And also to accentuate the positive. Those are the 2 points of interest that I took off of that meeting. Then we had a September 26th meeting in 2019 where the members took an implicit bias test, which I was a little concerned that you would do that to some of the people that were there to anyway, it's a term that was first coined back in 1995 by psychologists, and the original definition is a theory, and it's used a lot in today's civil rights debates. So I was concerned about that. And then we also, on January 28th of 2021, they discussed microaggressions, which are unprovoked attacks. And do we have professional people on this board? I know you can't answer that, but here's just something that bothered me. Because when you're talking about the way that people act or their aggressions, and the Equity Council, the way I understand it, gives recommendations to you folks for your school board to make a decision. So some of these things I'm thinking, I hope there's some good professional people. We have a lot of counselors in our schools, and I hope they're being considered and questioned, and a lot of these things that deal with like microaggressions, I would think that that would be a counselor's position and not a group of people which is made up of school board. Ms. Exline is on that to oversee everything. And then you have some just general parents, which are on there. So like I said, I hope there's some good professional people there. If the Equity Council is giving recommendations to our school board, there was also a couple of things that they were requested to read or to read over. One of them was called Roots of Justice. So I looked that up, and it's concerning because it's quite it discusses anti-racism. And Roots of Justice is professional training, of which I think a couple of our Equity Council people went to, and it provides anti-racism and anti-oppression training and consulting. The foundational workshop is 20 hours. It includes topics such as history of racism, resistance, the systematic reality of racism, white privilege, racial, cultural identity, and institutional racism. Other programs offerings include racial identity retreats, training, and institution, the process for institutional diversity, and customized workshops. So those were all some things that, I don't know. Salina's pretty diverse, and I think we have a pretty good variety of people, as you can tell by our young people that received awards. It looked like they all got along fine. Then one other one, this video has been shown, it looks like 3 times at the Equity Council meetings, and it's called, it's by Jane Elliott. It's a video. I think you owe it to yourselves, parents and other people, if you aren't aware of this video being shown to these people for advice. Jane Elliott is a human rights activist. She's very, very hung up and says all whites are racist. I think to let our children who are sitting in on this council, to let them hear her opinions. And the second video is very political and very much degrading of our last president, speaks against him and speaks of him being a racist. So I think, you know, if we're going to promote our children and help them to learn, I think maybe this is Constitution Week. This would be a good week or a good time for our Equity Council to maybe think about working on what our country is about and the positives, actually. That was one of the first statements in 2019 that they were supposed to promote, was building things up in our school system. So I was quite disappointed, and I would think that that should be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Booth. Next, we have Rodney Penn.
Can you hear me okay? I'm going to move this up just a little bit so I don't look down too much. My name's Rodney Penn. I'm a graduate of a Salina high school. I have 2 adult children who graduated from Salina Public Schools, and I currently have 2 children in USD 305. Recently, we created a group called Kansas Parents in Education. Our mission statement, we're a growing group of concerned parents, community members, and USD 305 staff. Our mission statement is to empower parents, advocate for educators, and emphasize academics. Let me begin with the last one, emphasize academics. USD 305 is underperforming academically. We are not near as good as we could be or should be. That's not a knock on anybody, it's just a fact. We are below average. Our goal should be to become the hands-down best public education in Kansas. That is possible here, and we should find a way to work together to make that happen. I looked at your mission statement when I walked in, our mission statement. It says the mission of Salina Public Schools is to be the best place to learn, but it doesn't say anything about education or academics. Second, our second mission is to advocate for educators. In the last 30 days, we have heard from 50 staff and educators in USD 305 who all report that USD 305 is a hostile work environment. They have been threatened by other staff. They have been demeaned. They are fearful, scared, and intimidated. They are also uncomfortable with and feel unsafe in reporting these incidents through the district's regular channels for fear of retribution. That's an issue. As an employer, USD 305 does not have the greatest reputation in the community. I'll tell you myself, I've interviewed for one position. I'm a recent college graduate. I'm applying for graduate school as we speak. And I've turned down an interview because of the hostile work environment that I've been told about by staff. It's a big reason for the staff shortage. We should be working together to change that. There is no reason why we can't make USD 305 the number one choice for teachers in the state of Kansas, but we have to work together to change the hostile culture that overshadows it. And lastly, empower parents. A little bit over a month ago, this board elected to take action it felt was in the best interest of all of its students, staff, and guests. And no one faults you for that. But in doing so, you have tugged at the fabric of our community, and it is ripping. Think of it like this. Imagine that this board's balance of power was skewed in a different direction and decided to ban the use of face masks on USD 305 property. All of the friends and parents on the pro-mask side of this issue, who I know personally, you heard from 2 doctors a month ago, I know them both personally. This issue is dividing people. People who were once friends are no longer friends. Those parents would feel the same as the parents who are opposed to the mandatory masking. Why? Because you took that choice away from them. Look out here at this audience, mask or no mask. They love their kids more than any of you could. I'm not saying you don't. I'm not saying you don't care. But a parent loves their child more than any teacher does. Respect them enough to make the choice appropriate for their child. Take a step toward uniting us. This is your out on this issue. You can wash your hands of it. You can be done of the headache. Just give that choice back to the parents and be done with it. This is how we begin to heal and work together. Give the mask decision back to the people that it belongs to, the parents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Penn. We did have one person request to speak to us on the test to stay matter. However, that is an agenda item this evening, so that is not, cannot be part of our public forum. Public forum is not for agenda items. Okay? So, all right. So we will move to, I'm sorry. Thank you again for taking time to visit with us. We do encourage and value the input from our community and USD 305 patrons. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us. And if there were questions, those things will be followed up with by our staff, the USD 305 staff. We will now move to the next item on our agenda, which is appointment of the 21-22 KASB delegates and alternatives.
Mr. President, I nominate Dana Kasb for our delegate to the KASB the convention in November.
Okay. Do we need to do the alternate and delegates
Which we did
separate?
together.
Do them together.
I will add to my motion that I nominate Mark Vandre for the alternate delegate.
Emma Doherty, second.
Okay, I think Mr. Grant beat you to it, Emma.
Very
Okay, so
quietly.
we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Mark, I didn't catch you on either vote. Okay, okay, so motion carries 7-0. Okay, so next item on our agenda is the discussion agenda. This goes to Ms. Exline for Stay, Learn, Play, Participate.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening. I want to visit with you tonight about just a discussion item for us to consider, for you to consider, putting in place a test to stay, learn, play, participate. And this has been something that we've discussed for quite some time. And so you may be asking, what are the goals of this? And really there are two goals. The first is to keep our students and staff healthy and in school, learning and teaching despite any exposures to COVID-19. So that's number one. And number two is to ensure our students have access to well-rounded educational opportunities. What I am needing to know is if the board is supportive of a testing protocol in our schools. And we want to be able to test all students and staff right now who are exposed to COVID-19 in our school building. And so when I'm talking tonight, I want you to be thinking through that frame. And you may ask, why not exposures in the community? And I'll get to that in a little bit. But what we want to do is make sure as we roll this out in our community, if you feel you can support it, is that we have something that's manageable, that our staff is able to do, and that we're able to sustain over time. If we find that, yes, this works well, then we could expand it to any exposures that were happening out in the community. But I'll share some data here in a little bit so that you understand why we're maybe starting a little bit slower. So why now? There really are four things. The first is, and I'll talk about each one of these in more detail, but the first one is that there were changes to the Saline County Health Department quarantine requirements. I have been working closely with Jason Tiller, and we did get some changes in place that ended up to where more students were able to stay in school when they were exposed to COVID-19. So that was a positive, and that made our numbers more manageable. The second is, after several weeks of school, we have a much clearer impact of a clearer picture of what that quarantine impact is. How many students we're really talking that we would be testing each day. How many students we typically are quarantining as a result of a positive. The third is I have a much better understanding of the demands that are currently on our staff. And what I don't want to do is put something in place that our staff can't manage. They work really hard for our students each day, and so we want to be respectful of that. Everybody has a full-time job, and trying to figure out what could they add to their plate and what was maybe too much. And so I have a better understanding of that now that school is in process and we know what our nurses are dealing with as far as illness goes. And then the last piece that I want to talk to you about is community trends. So let's start with those Saline County quarantine protocols. This is as currently applied in Salina Public Schools. I want to make a disclaimer here. USD 305 and public schools do not have the statutory authority to quarantine students. The quarantine and isolation is when you actually have the illness. Quarantine and isolation are actually ordered by the Saline County Health Department. So what is happening right now in our schools is that if you are within 6 feet for 10 plus minutes of a positive case, when either party is unmasked, that is resulting in the Saline County Health Department saying that you need to quarantine, okay? So 6 feet for 10 plus minutes. That is different than last time I talked to you. Because last time I talked to you, there was a quarantine even if both parties were masked. But we've been following the data in our schools, and I had a conversation with Jason Tiller about could we reconsider that? And so right now there is no quarantine in our schools if both parties are masked, okay? So that's the change in quarantine that I mentioned. Okay, so the next thing that I told you that I wanted to talk to you about was just where we were as far as COVID-19 cases and the resulting quarantines. So this is data from August 12th until last Friday. And so right now we have had 94 total positive cases in our schools in that time period. Those 94 cases resulted in 304 quarantines, okay? And so, and we had another 216 close contacts, meaning that if we weren't masked and if we hadn't gotten that those quarantine guidelines changed, that those 216 close contacts would have also had to quarantine, okay? One other caveat, if we weren't masked, that would be a 6-foot berth instead of a 3-foot. And so the numbers I am reporting to you are 3 foot, and here's why. I'm wanting to track any student that would have been a close contact so that I just know what's happening in our schools as far as spread. And that's not exact, but I feel like that is something that we need to be looking at, okay? So 94 total cases, 304 total quarantines in that about 1 month period, and 216 additional close contacts that would have had to quarantine had we not been masking. You can look at the difference between elementary, middle school, and high school. The one thing that I will tell you is that the vast majority of those quarantines have come from lunch. So what are we doing about that? We have done several things. We are working to get kids spread out more at lunch because they're unmasked at that time. And in order to not quarantine, you have to be at least 6 feet apart if you end up having a positive. Well, with the number of students that we have and the size of our facilities and the time that we have, that's a challenge. And so we are working to get students spread apart more. We are using stable seating so that we're sitting by the same students each day, and that's true at all levels. And the other thing is we're looking at options at middle school to add some additional supervision so that we can spread students out more, because middle school lunch is a challenge, okay? So that's where we are cases. Okay, daily quarantine comparison. I just want you, this is so that you have context of how many tests that we would need to give each day, because with a testing protocol, what happens is anybody that is quarantined takes a test every single day, and if that test is negative, they can go ahead and come to school. So I wanted you to have some context about how many students are we talking about. So on the 17th of August, we had 0 students in quarantine as a result of a school exposure. This is early in the year. We had 58 in quarantine as a result of community exposure. So now let's look down to the 27th of August. We had 99 students in quarantine as a result of a school exposure, and on that same date, 135 additional in quarantine as a result of a community exposure. That might have been at home, it might have been out in the community. I don't know the specifics of those, but I know that we had 135 students. So on the 10th, and we had started to put some mitigation strategies in place once we saw what was happening with our data, we were down to 54 students as a result of school exposure, and there were 94 students as a result of community exposure. Those 54 students, with what I am presenting to you tonight, if you would approve this, those 54 students would be able to test and continue to come to school if they had a negative test result, okay? And long term, if we can handle that and handle it well and it works well, we could look to expanding that to the community exposures. But you can see the difference in the numbers there and what the impact would be. Okay, so community data. I wanted to share with you, we talked about the community data when you actually made the decision to put the masking mandate in place. And I wanted to share with you where we are in terms of the community data tonight. I think it's important to have this context because we could do nothing and continue like we are. But the reality is that these numbers are not getting better. And so if we can put something in place that assists in your goal of having students in school, that is something that I think I need to put in front of you to consider, okay? So I pulled these from the KDHE website, and the community transmission level is actually from the CDC. We are currently a high community transmission level, and that has remained high for several weeks now. That's the highest level. It's a 4-level scale, okay? I pulled the 0 to 4-year-olds. I pulled the ages that we actually work with, because in our Heartland programs, we are working birth to 5, and then, of course, we have our elementary, middle school, and high school. So 0 to 4-year-olds in Saline County right now, the number per 100,000 2-week is 438.85. 150 is considered red. That same age group is a 7.25% positive. that would be considered yellow, okay? If you think about last year's kind of gating criteria. On the 5 to 10-year-olds, they're 535.93 per 100,000 for the last 2 weeks, and a 12.5% positive. That's a red and an orange. On 11 to 13-year-olds, 990.1 per 100,000, and 14.29% positive. Again, red, orange. 15 is where it changes to red. And 14 to 17-year-olds, 901.53 per 100,000 and 10.23% positive, again, red, orange. Okay? And then finally, just so that you have some context, I gave you the total population. Keep in mind our young kids are included in this number. So the total population, it was 537 per 100,000, which 150 is red, and then 9.74% positive, just so that you have that that comparison. And so that 9.74 is yellow, okay? So these are the pieces of data that I am looking at to determine at what point we need to have another conversation about masking. Because you made, in the motion that you made, you talked about needing to look at the data, and when we started to see things get better, that you wanted to actually have a conversation again. So it's really these 3 data points that I'm looking at: that community transmission level, the number per cases per 100,000, and the percent positivity rate. Okay? Why am I showing this to you tonight? Because I think that these numbers over the last several weeks have grown. But I think that we need to do something else to try to intervene to get students back in school if we can. And if you feel like it is safe to do so, I just want for us to have that conversation and at least entertain that idea. Okay? So, requirements for a modified quarantine. The first right now, with the way we've written the grant, is COVID exposure occurred at school. And again, that is just because of the numbers piece until we know how we can manage this. And then if we can expand, we would. The family or the staff member, because staff would be eligible for this as well, would need to sign a modified quarantine consent form. Just that, yes, not everybody has to do this. It would just be an option. So if your student were exposed at school and you wanted to take advantage of this, you would sign a consent form. If you wanted to have your child do the quarantine at home, that would be fine. That's family choice. You could do the quarantine at home. The third thing is agree to mask while you're in the building. And we're masking anyway, so that is a non-issue. The fourth is that the test results would be disclosed to the Saline County Health Department and KDHE. This is an infectious disease, and we have to disclose that. We have no choice. But I want families, if they do this, that they just need to know that that disclosure will happen. And then the fifth, the requirement for a modified quarantine is a daily negative test result, okay? So how exactly would it work? Here's what the procedure would be. The Saline County Health Department would do what they've been doing, and they would notify our guardians or our employees of a school exposure and that someone was required to quarantine, okay? So you would get notification that your child was required to quarantine or that you as an employee were required to quarantine. The second step would be that if the parent or guardian or the employee wanted to participate in the modified quarantine, meaning I'm going to quarantine during the school day at school with my mask and my negative test, and the rest of the time I'll quarantine at home as ordered by the health department. At that point, the guardian or employee would sign the paperwork in order for us to be able to do the test. The student or the employee would report for testing each day. When I had a conversation with County Health, they have agreed that we could make it to where tests are good for 24 hours, which is helpful for our families because we could test early in the day for families that works well, and we could test late in the day for families that works well, and that late in the day test would be good for the next day. In some families, it's really hectic in the morning, and in some families, it's really hectic in the afternoon, so that would help our families. And then the fourth thing is that the student or the employee could attend school and activities each day the test is negative. So if I were participating in tennis, I could come in the morning, I could get my test, I could go to school, and I could continue that evening with tennis practice. I could go home, and the next morning I would come back in and test again, okay? If I were a student that had a Saturday activity, I would come in either Friday night and test for the Saturday activity, or we may look at making an option available for Saturday morning, depending on staffing, okay? Because we do sometimes have those opportunities on Saturday morning. And then again, the masking would be required, and so they would have to agree to mask during the quarantine. So here's what the next steps really would be at this point. I need to know and where the board is thinking-wise on this kind of proposal. I need for you to know that Saline, I want to be very transparent. Saline County Health Department has cautioned me that the testing materials are getting harder and harder to come by. And they are noticing that with the different organizations out in the community that are actually providing these rapid tests. The test that we would be looking at is a Binex test. Our nurse would train other staff how to do that. It goes just up into each nostril, twist around, and the results are in about 15 minutes. And so it's a really quick turnaround. But those are getting harder and harder to come by. So one of the things that this will be dependent on would be our continued ability to get those materials, okay? So the supply chain right now just is simply not able to keep up with the demand, although KDHE is who is providing these materials to school districts. So they come directly from KDHE, and right now the procedure is that you email when you need more, and they send those materials to you. The other thing that I need for you to know, if you decide that we would like to go ahead and apply for the grant, is that it would be pending KDHE approval. Then they would have to look at what we have included and approve that. And then we would need to hire staff. I told you that one of the things that I needed to assess, and why now, was I needed to know where we were as far as what staff could handle. With the number of cases that we're having, and with the other demands of medication and other ill students, that kind of thing, that our nurses are dealing with, we really are needing to hire additional staff to do this. And it may be that our staff is willing to do it because it would need to be before school starts or after school's out in order for students to be able to participate in the school day. So we really may be able to hire our own staff, but it will be in addition to what is already happening. So that being able to roll this out would be contingent on that. And then finally, the last thing would be that we would need to determine testing times and locations. We had to do what was called a CLIA waiver, and we are approved for our sites to be able to do testing. Right now, my thinking is that we would probably look at one testing site to be able to have all of the resources in one area. But that would be something that, as we look at numbers, once this is approved, if we decide to go this direction, that at that point we would make a decision on how we wanted to roll that out and staff it. Okay? So with that, I am open to any questions that you might have.
On the last piece there, if we had to go with one site, which makes sense. I mean, my assumption, for better or worse, is that it probably would be difficult to find some of the staff. So given that assumption, one site makes sense. What would we do for families that struggle with transportation? Would busing or that type of thing be relevant to get to a site, or would that be a family-by-family thing? What's your thought there?
Yeah, because the student would be in quarantine until that negative test happened, that would be a family responsibility to be able to get there. We would, we talked about several sites, and we were thinking centrally located today. But that's another reason that we were really talking about that maybe 2 different times of day would be helpful to our families. But yeah, transportation would be on the family. Other questions?
I have one. So Mays did this. It was a bit of it fell apart. I think, are they back to testing? I think they are. I think I read that, right?
Yeah, they are. I talked to their superintendent, and they are saying that they are having about 90 to 95% of the students that are eligible So the students that tested positive at school, that were exposed to a positive at school in our case, about 90 to 95% of those students are taking advantage. They did stop after the very first day and had to regroup on how they were going to manage it. Because of that, I did go and watch testing be completed this morning out at southeast of Saline, and Roger Stumpf was very gracious, and his nursing staff was very gracious to let me come and actually watch what they were doing and how it was set up and how many students that they could get through the system, because it's those nuances that make this a challenge to roll out.
Good, and I appreciate you going out and watching, because I think that's important. The other question I have is, Mays is masking and testing, correct? Their students are still, everybody is masking at Mays, correct? Am I wrong?
I can't answer that. I was thinking they were masking at elementary maybe only.
Okay, maybe
I know initially they weren't masking.
Uh-huh.
But I'm not sure exactly where they are on masking protocols at this point. I know many of the big districts have been engaging in conversations over the last several weeks about whether they need to change based upon just their data, just like we're talking about tonight.
Okay. Third question is, are there any exemptions to this modified quarantine? You have to either take the test every day or stay home.
Right, so remember, we have no authority over a quarantine.
Right.
That is out of our statutory authority. And so this is something that the county health officer has to agree to, and then KDHE has to agree to, because they are really the oversight agencies when it comes to public health. And so there is no exception. So there's a choice,
Right.
because a family could choose, you know what, I want to just go ahead and quarantine at home, or I really would like to take advantage of this, knowing that if someplace on some day along the road I get a positive, then I am in isolation at that point as a positive COVID case. So, but as far as us being able to adapt the requirements, we don't have the authority to adapt that. And the other thing is that that our test to play, participate, learn, that is only applicable to school, so the rest of the quarantine is still in effect. So the student can come to school, they can do our activities that they're a direct participant in, but outside of that, according to the health department, they would need to still continue to quarantine at home, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense.
Okay.
Thank you.
I have a couple questions. So you talked about requiring masks while you're coming to school. When you're being tested, if you don't test positive, you come to school, but you have to wear your mask.
Right.
Does this override the exemptions, the religious and health-related exemptions? Do those folks still have to wear a mask even though they wouldn't normally?
In order to qualify for the modified quarantine, the student has to mask, or the staff member has to mask.
Okay, thank you. And the other question I had was about finding more positive cases, which I think I had heard you mention before, that if we just send everybody home in a quarantine, only people that start exhibiting symptoms are made to be isolated at the end of their quarantine, or, depending on the time frame. But if you're testing them every day, then even the asymptomatic kids or staff are having to be put in isolation. So and then you have to take account of who they've been around in the last, few days, and so then you may end up with more positive cases because you're doing this testing. Is that right?
Okay, so here's what I know from the superintendents I've talked to. They've had anywhere between 2% and 6% positives. So several positives a day have been coming from the testing that they've been doing. And then they have to look at who would be close contacts with those students when they were in school. In our district, if both parties were masked, it wouldn't, the only student that would be going home is the student that is the actual positive, because of the way that county health is doing the quarantines in our district. So that's the reason that that masking is critically important.
So what do, I mean, but they still have to eat lunch. What happens then? I guess you're just trying to spread everybody out.
Right, and we're trying to spread students out as much as possible. Keep in mind, they would have had a negative test that morning. We will do the best that we can. But is there some risk? You know, I would say yes. I mean, it's likely that we will have some students along the way that do test positive. The good thing is, if they're positive, then they are out of school. And the parents and guardians know what they're dealing with in their own family. So, but we probably will, in those students that are quarantined, run into some positives based upon what other districts are seeing, and asymptomatic positives.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm thinking further about, you mentioned that KDHE or whoever, the supply of the tests might run low. This may be too far down in the weeds, I apologize if it is, but let's just say on some given day we ran out. How would we notify people and try to spread that word?
Right. Well, we would know how many students are in quarantine if we're doing school only. We know how many students are in quarantine tomorrow based upon school exposure. We know right now how many students are in quarantine based upon school exposure for Monday. Now, the difference is we may have a few cases tomorrow that result in more quarantines. But we would need to look at our supply, and if we need to notify or borrow from a nearby district for us to be able to maintain, we would do that. And it may be, to be perfectly honest, that at some point we have to say, you know what, we're gonna have to pause this for a little while, and we'll just have to take that as we were able to keep those kids in school on the days that we were able to, and we'll pause for a little while, and when more supply comes in, we'll be able to start. So that'll be a communication challenge, but we do have a messaging system that allows us to communicate quickly. We could also, in an emergency situation, if we ran out, we would be able to communicate directly with those families through our messaging system, text message, email, phone. We have the accessibility to do all of that in pretty quick order, and Jennifer Kamian's office can take care of that and help us with that.
I have one question, Ms. Sexline.
Okay.
One thing that I didn't see as a part of this, I know we have a vaccination piece. If someone is vaccinated or has been through that process, how do they fall into this?
So the way any individual that is vaccinated is being handled right now, and again, that's a quarantine issue, and so under the authority of the health department. But the way that is being handled right now, if you are fully vaccinated, then you do not have to quarantine. They just ask you to monitor for symptoms. So even if I'm unmasked and at the lunch table with someone who is positive, and then I would not, as a fully vaccinated person, I would not have to quarantine. I would get a notice that I had been exposed, and then I'd be asked to watch for symptoms. And so the vaccination status does matter with the way that they're applying that right now.
So if someone, staff or student had been vaccinated, they would not even apply to this process, is that correct?
Right, they'd just be able to continue to come to school, and they would get a note to just watch and see if they had symptoms. And we haven't had many, but we have had, 2 handfuls maybe of students who have been exposed and not had to quarantine because they were fully vaccinated.
I know this is on our discussion agenda, but just to speed the process along, I'd like to make a motion if I could.
Go ahead, Mr. Grant.
Okay. I move we approve filing the grant application for there's not a grid motion here, so let me piece this together. USD 305 COVID Test to Learn, Stay, Play, and Participate Modified Quarantine, allowing students and staff identified as close contacts and quarantined by Saline County Health Department as a result of school exposure the option to take a COVID test to stay in school during the quarantine period, contingent upon hiring staff to conduct the testing and the logistics being figured out.
I'll second that motion.
Dr. Bandre, second. We have a motion, a second, and discussion. Mr. Gardner?
due to the fact that there was a person that wanted to comment on this, could it be possible for me to hear what they have to say before I make a decision?
You're asking for additional comment from public? Okay.
Can I, as she's coming up, can I just say one thing that I need for you to consider? The materials that we gave you, what we're asking you to approve is the actual, that we can apply. The materials that we gave you may need to be modified based upon further conversation with KDHE and Saline County Health. We have the initial approval, but as this goes through, some of those small things may get modified, and I just need for you to know that.
Thank you. Yeah, Lynn explained it really, really clearly as it possibly could be. I just wanted to actually say thank you for considering this for our children. Where I work, I actually work for a manufacturing company as a nurse practitioner for that manufacturing company and their families. I do this with 732 patients by myself with one nurse, and it works. And we have kept more men on the line, not quarantined and working. We are actually without masks now, and this does work. I'm happy to help with anything that I can, any questions if you have for me, but we did roll this out, and I just wanted to just say thank you very much for the opportunity. I got to speak with Miss Exline previous, so thank you.
Okay. Does that take care of you, Mr. Gardner?
Things were cracking as I walked.
I do that too.
I just have a couple of thoughts I want to share. And the goal of all of us is to keep kids in school. Nobody wants anybody to get sick. Nobody wants anybody to have to go to the hospital. Nobody wants anybody to die. But the reality is the quarantine is based on a lot of assumptions. The assumption is, because I was close to someone, that I've been exposed. The assumption is that person who had a positive test was, I don't know the technical term, emitting virus. The assumption is that they didn't get it at home, that they didn't get it playing with the kids in the neighborhood, that they didn't get it elsewhere. There's a lot of assumptions. And another one that, granted, this is forgive me for simplifying this idea, but say, for instance, at one of the high schools, Joey Bag of Donuts is mad at Bobby Joe because Bobby Joe made a joke and his girlfriend laughed and says, oh, yeah, I was next to Bobby Joe. He's got a quarantine now, too. I want him to get that thing shoved up his nose every day so he can go to school. So there's a ton of assumptions made about this quarantine because we have no proof of where anybody picked up this virus. Anybody, none of us. And the reality is, if we find middle ground on the masks, for example, the middle ground is, the reality is, at best, that little piece of spittle that comes out of your mouth when you're talking or when you're eating, it catches that. And the only way to prevent that from infecting me is to distance a little bit and to practice good hand hygiene and not touch my face. And we've known that for centuries. So I get it. I'm glad that we are addressing the idea and wanting to keep kids in school, but some of it is based on a lot of assumptions, and especially the quarantine. So yes, I mean, let me back up and say one more thing. And Holly can probably back me up on this. She's a medical professional, but, and I used to work at a clinic here as a social worker. If someone is tested, for example, with a PCR test at a local clinic, that PCR test is not detecting the coronavirus. It's detecting broken, dead fragments of the coronavirus. Not even of the coronavirus, it's detecting broken, dead DNA. The only way they assume that it's positive is because they have symptoms. If you don't have symptoms and you get a positive PCR, it could be that you've already overcome it. So I appreciate that we want to try to keep kids in school, but let's not rely on a lot of assumptions to make that decision.
Thank you, Mr. Penn.
Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion from the board?
Are you ready for this? Do you want us to pass this now, or could you use more time? Are you ready?
I think if you could pass this now, it would allow us to go ahead and get staffing in place. It would allow us to get this grant sent in and maybe get ahead of that shortage. So I really think the timing would help if the board is amenable to letting us go ahead and move forward.
Thank you.
Mr. Gardner.
I have a short memory. Your motion was for those in school, not the ones out, correct? Okay.
And, I mean, as district staff thinks we're ready, like I said, with hiring and all of that, able to roll it out in a non-roller coaster type fashion compared to other districts. I mean, that's the idea behind the logistics and staffing piece of it. So I think it's only effective if it's consistent and available to our families, and we're doing it in a way that we know we can execute day after day on making it happen.
Thank you, Mr. Grant. And I think the other piece is this doesn't turn on tomorrow. There's a lot of steps. We've got to apply for the grant. We've got to get approved. We've got a lot of things. So I'll call for the vote now.
One more comment. I just appreciate the district staff that's worked on this, Mr. Cooper, and I know everyone else that's been involved in the application and whatnot, of taking the time to make sure we're doing this right in a manageable manner. I know have been slow to act on certain things from members of the community, but I think we've made decisions as quickly as we're able to execute on them for a district of 7,000 students and 1,800 staff members in a consistent way for our families that they can plan on day to day. And I think that's been important. So thank you to all those staff members involved.
Thank you. Members in favor, please signify by raising your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0.
Thank you. And I would echo the thank you to David Cooper for his help on digging out information for me. So thanks, David.
All right. The next item on our agenda is school board reports and upcoming dates of importance. We do have September 23rd, the Saline Education Foundation Fall Social at the Country Club, and then the KSB conference in November. Dr. Bandry.
So I apologize from a month ago. I failed to mention, I always get to go first. You guys remind me of things I've forgotten, but I failed a month ago to mention that I attended the back-to-school staff meeting. And that seems a long time ago, but it was a great event, and I'm glad things have gone as well as they have since. I've attended 2 Saline Education Foundation meetings along the way, one for the full board, one for the executive committee. And again, the social is an upcoming, very important piece of Saline Education Foundation work. I think you're aware this is a big change. I mean, for 15 years or more, SCF's had a breakfast. Now we're going to a social. And part of the reason for that, not the only one, but part of it is trying to find a way to get teachers more engaged that just flat couldn't get there early in the morning. So I'm excited about the opportunity, and we'll see what direction it takes. We also, at our last SCF board meeting, welcomed 4 new board members on. A couple of people had terms had gone off, 4 new people came on, so it's exciting to welcome new leadership in there. Would also mention I've attended, since last meeting, 2 Smoky Hill Education Service Center meetings. The first one was 2 days after our last meeting, and the second one was last week. And I would just say that all's going really well there. I think a highlight is Diane Mann, who I believe you all are aware has been the treasurer, kind of the right-hand person at Smoky Hill for a long time. She's gradually giving thought to retirement. We're encouraging her away from that, you understand, but she's thinking about it. So we approved just recently hiring of, we haven't come up with a title yet, but kind of an assistant who will start learning some of her wisdom, help take some of the weight of financial and payroll and so forth things. So that's a good step for Smoky Hill. I would also say that in the last month, I appreciate members of the community reaching out to us. I've spent more time in the last month than the previous 15 months I've been on the board dialoguing with people, and that's great. We don't always agree, that's fine. but we dialogue, and I appreciate people's input. So we'll just let you all know that I've had that opportunity.
Attended a Parks and Rec Advisory Board meeting in August, and also CICIE Board of Control meeting. Just a couple updates from that. Our transitions program that we had approved during the last school year, moving to the Mulberry Street district property, is up and running there, and enjoying the new space, and kind of an expansion of programs as they've been able to add things. And was very, one staff member who leads that program was there to speak and was very happy to be there. So that's all I have.
I missed my last two meetings because I was getting ready for the marathon. So I let Gabe and Mark pick up my shift there. But the marathon's going great. Every school's running. Mrs. Exline was out there at Sunset, and just loving. It's awesome. If you haven't been there, go. So, and the other thing is, if you have not turned in RSVP to the Saline Education Foundation Social, please do so. He was asking for that today. That's it.
Yes, I attended the Equity Council meeting right after the last, I guess at the end of last month, and we are beginning to read Belonging Through a Culture of Dignity, which we on the board are also reading. I have been in meetings preparing for Arts Infusion with the Saline Arts and Humanities, and we're really happy that as a teaching artist, I get to go into the classrooms this year. I have made myself a new mask so that you can see my mouth through it. So the kids can see my mouth through it if it doesn't steam up too bad. So I have, I guess a long time ago, I listened to Lynn Exline on the radio. That was since the last meeting, I believe. She always does a great job, and she's got fans on the radio too. So that's always interesting. I, like Mark, have been spending time responding to emails and reading emails and trying always to respond in a respectful manner and including explanation of some of the many places I get my information. So I believe that's all. Thank you.
Attended the Heartland board meeting. One thing to report on them is that they are struggling trying to fill some of their positions. So if you know somebody that might be interested in contributing and working with small kids, I would strongly urge you to have them contact the good folks at Heartland so that we can get the education opportunities available for the kids. Outside of that, just answering emails as respectfully as possible.
I have no committee reports, however, responding to emails and text and phone calls and listening to our superintendent on the radio stations, and plan on attending the social for the Education Foundation coming up.
Thank you. And I think that the thing that comes to mind to report for me is the chamber meeting we attended, and Scott talks about our struggles with staff. Struggles with staff is not just related to USD 305 or Heartland. It seems to be a community problem. That's one of the challenges that many of the businesses in our community are facing. So we need to get folks who are ready to go work. We've got a lot of industry that's ready to provide jobs and opportunity in our community if we have the workers there to do that. So we want to help with that. The other piece of that is housing. That tends to be a real challenge, especially for industries looking to move to our community. The ability to have housing for staff relocations and things like that. So there's a lot of things that are in the works there. Hopefully some of that can come along quickly and move us forward. Now for the superintendent's report, Ms. Exline.
Okay, just a couple updates for you. I've done several presentations. I think you are probably aware of those. The Chamber of Commerce, several times a year I have a chance to update the chamber members on what the status of USD 305. So I had the opportunity to do that. Also had the opportunity to meet with Altrusa International last night and talk to them about USD 305. They are a wonderful partner for us. They partner with Heartland Early Education Center. They partner with our GED program out at Saline Adult Education Center, Partners for Success. And they partner with multiple of our elementary schools with book drives, mitten drives. So they are a wonderful community partner. So it was nice to be out and have a chance to visit with them. Several radio interviews that you've mentioned. I always enjoy doing that. I think it's a good way to kind of hear what the public's questions are that sometimes maybe don't get directly to me, where our radio folks are asking on their behalf. We had a meeting, Dr. Curtis Stevens and I met with the Chamber about internship placements. We are trying to increase the number of internship opportunities that our students have, because that is a great way for them to apply their academic learning and to build soft skills, and for them to see Salina as a viable place to move back to as an adult. And so we are meeting to try to forge some additional partnerships and places for interns. And so I appreciate the Chamber meeting with us on that. And then the last thing that I just wanted to highlight is that we were able to, Jennifer came in and I were able to go out and do the Horizon Award notifications. And Horizon Awards are for first-year teachers that are in their second year, but showed excellence the prior year and really stand out great examples of teachers that are new to the profession. And so we were able to honor Cole Dow. He is the Central High School welding instructor. He came through a non-traditional route. Actually, my understanding is spent some time in the military, and he has transitioned into the classroom and is really enjoying it. It was really fun to see him with his students. And then the other teacher is Lindsay Chavez. She is a grade 4 teacher out at Sunset. And it was fun. Her mother is in the building and was able to be there with us when we did that honor, and her students were so incredibly excited. It's fun to just see how much students of all ages really connect with their teachers, and it's really nice to see the positive that's happening in our classrooms. So we will be off to do the same thing with Teachers of the Year very soon, and so we'll probably have an update for you at the next board meeting on that.
Very good, thank you. All right, our next item is going to be executive session. We do have a couple of those that we need to take care of this evening. If we could get a motion for personnel, please.
How long for the first?
10 minutes, please, for the first one.
And we come back here after each one. Okay. Move the Board of Education go into executive session at 7 p.m. for 10 minutes for the purpose of discussing personnel matters of non-elected personnel and their contractual obligations, because if this matter were discussed in open session, it might evade the privacy of those discussed, and that the Board of Education reconvene into open session at 7:10 in this room, the SEC room.
Second.
Motion is second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0.
So I have a question. You guys stand in the Yeah, 7 o'clock.
All right, so we come back from that. Do we have a motion?
Yes, sorry, I didn't know my mic was unmuted. Mr. President, I move we accept the early resignation of Raquel Marin as presented, but that we do not grant the requested waiver of liquidated damages.
Motion, Dr. Bandre, second. Any discussion? All in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0.
Mr. President,
Mr. Grant?
I move we accept the resignation of Nicole Noon as of September 7th, 2021, and grant her request to waive the assessment of liquidated damages.
All right, we have a motion.
Majority second.
Motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. Now we have another executive session, this time for attorney-client privilege. Do we have a motion?
Did we say 5 or did we say 10? 10. Okay. I'll move that the Board of Education go into executive session at 7:15, for 10 minutes for the purpose of consultation with board legal counsel on matters which are privileged in the attorney-client relationship, which if discussed in open session would waive that privilege, and that the Board of Education reconvene into open session at 7:25 in the SEC room.
We have a motion and a second. Anyone? Dr. Bandre? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. Okay, we are back from executive session. Do we have a motion?
Mr. President, I move to select David G. Seeley with Fleeson, Gooing, Colson, and Kitch LLC as special counsel to handle legal matters for the board as needed in the future.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. Our next matter is an executive session regarding personnel. Do we have a motion?
Mr. President, I move the Board of Education go into executive session at 7:30, 7:28 for 15 minutes for the purpose of discussing personnel matters of non-elected personnel and their contractual obligations, because if this matter were discussed in open session, it might invade the privacy of those discussed, and that the Board of Education reconvene into open session at 7:43 in the SEC room.
Second.
Motion and a second. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0. Okay, so we are back from executive session. Is there a motion?
Move that we adjourn.
Motion to
Second.
adjourn, second. All in favor, raise your right hand. Opposed, same sign. Motion carries 7-0.
All right.
Can I say something really quick, just that I heard? Okay.
Are we done, David? Are you good?